Hey, this is Nick Jain, CEO of IdeaScale. Excited to bring you another episode of Fireside Chats with Chief Innovation Officers. Today's guest is Avishkar Shivast, the Chief Innovation Officer at PDP Group. As a third-generation leader in his family's logistics business, Avishkar has been instrumental in modernizing operations, HR, and IT since joining his family organization in 2014. Notably, he's also the first Indian to win the FIATA Young Logistics Professional Award in the Asia-Pacific region. So congratulations, Avishkar, and really excited to have you here today. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Nick. It's a pleasure being here and looking forward to our chat.
Perfect. So I'll start off with a very high level question. What is the PDP Group, and what do you do there as the Chief Innovation Officer?
Okay, so the PDP Group is a family-run logistics organization, and it's been there now for over 50 years. So that's like 5 decades. And we are into completely international logistics solutions, which means whether it's customs broking, whether it's transportation, freight forwarding, warehousing, or cargo handling operations, we are there. So we as a company are focused on delivering the first mile to the last mile logistics solutions to exporters and importers with our in-house infrastructure. If I had to define in a nutshell, that's what I'd say. We deliver end-to-end logistics solutions with a single window infrastructure.
And just to confirm, you guys actually have your own trucks, your own warehouses. It's not just a paper brokerage firm, correct?
Yes, you're absolutely correct. We have 150 trucks of our own. That's a fleet of 150 trailers, and we are having 500,000 square feet of warehousing space in India, especially in Eastern India and the Northeast in the states of West Bengal and Tripura. So, yeah, we are a company investing in hard infrastructure so that we are pretty much having the in-house capabilities to deliver to the customer as per their requirements.
Perfect. I love trucking logistics. I used to run a mid-sized trucking and a warehousing firm myself. So I love having hard assets and talking with people who run real equipment. Okay, so my follow-up question is, what does a chief innovation officer do at the PDP Group?
So, Nick, I firmly believe that in today's world, innovation is no longer a luxury which we can say, okay, some companies can afford to innovate, some companies do not need to. Innovation is, in fact, a requirement. So, at the PDP Group, what innovation means is how do I bring my different service offerings in a seamless platform so that the customer who's enjoying an end to end logistics solution, he is getting a seamless experience when he's dealing with the customs broking department or when he's dealing with the transportation department. He should not think that he's dealing with two different companies. Now that sounds very easy on paper, but to make sure that you have a seamless work integration across a team of 150 plus employees, for me that's innovation. The company's culture is clearly laid out. It is innovated where there is technology involved, and there is innovation when people are understanding why they do what they do. So for me, innovation is just to make sure that there is a seamless experience across the different verticals.
Got it. And I'm going to ask a kind of a devil's advocate question, ask that about the logistics industry more generally, right? So the way I understand the logistics industry, it gets stuff from point A to point B. 1,000 years ago, we did it via camels and horses. 100 years ago, we did it via steamships. Today, we're doing it via trucks and trains. Does innovation just mean you're moving from camels to trains and planes, or does innovation mean something different in the logistics industry?
Okay, that's an
And it's a
interesting
devil's
analogy.
advocate question. Again, I've worked
Yes,
in this
yes.
industry, but some of
So
my audience may not have.
So innovation would pretty much go not on, yes, we have evolved from camels and now we move to trucks, rails, and ships. But its innovation is more on how is the communication flowing across the different streams. So yes, we are moving cargo from point A to point B. Now, how is the documentation moving around? How is the customer getting a real-time understanding of where his cargo is? If there are any kind of last-minute changes, for example, a vessel has been delayed or a vessel has come in too early, how quickly can the logistics service provider adapt to make sure that the customer is able to place their cargo in the right vessel at the right time? So if you ask me, innovation is how are we moving the cargo from point A to point B, not by the means of the method, but how are we communicating, how are we staying agile so that if there are any changes in the supply chain, we are smart enough to make sure that the customer is aware where the issue lies, where the solutions can be proposed, and then we can come back to them and give them that peace of mind even though The supply chain is highly unpredictable. Innovation is how much we can control what we can control.
As someone who used to run a trucking company, innovate or logistics is incredibly unpredictable, right? I dealt with a freak snowstorm that 12 hours shut down the entire northeast of the United States and just destroyed the entire supply chain. And this was in the middle of COVID. So yes, I cannot imagine, and I was never dealing with anything international, so I cannot imagine the complexity you deal with in your world, because I did not have to deal with vessels and ships coming in or customs or anything like that. So let me jump ahead and ask a little bit about innovation in the PDP Group. My understanding is it's a family-run business. You said it's been around 50 years. One of the things I've heard is that in family-run businesses, sometimes it is difficult to balance tradition when you may have your grandmother or grandfather working in the business with innovation, whether that be technological or process innovation. Do you experience that at the PDP Group where you're balancing tradition versus innovation? And if so, how do you manage that challenge or conflict? Or conversely, it's easy and everyone just loves to innovate.
No, I mean that's a very interesting question because there's a lot of perspectives to this. What I feel is first and foremost, the organization must have its mission and core values clearly laid out. Like if my mission, if for example my company's vision is to be the benchmark logistics company in India with cross-functional digital setups, in-house infrastructure, a skilled workforce, and by leveraging the resources of our different departments. Once that vision is clear, for us, innovation is just a part of accomplishing that vision. How am I going to have those cross functional digital setups? I need to communicate. I need to have an out of the box approach when I'm dealing with the different departments. Yes, when we talk about multi generational businesses, the one thing which is very important is to have those tough conversations, which is where do we want the company to be after 5 years or after 3 years? If that vision is clear and everyone is feeling that they want the company to be in a certain direction, then I feel yes, it's much more easier, or I'd rather say people are much more open to the innovation. Because see, Nick, the problem which lies in traditional businesses and why we use the word tradition, sometimes with family members, people are reluctant to have those tough conversations. I mean, my dad is, of course, my dad, but at office, if I treat him as a senior management or as a boss, things get easier. It's not easy initially, it gets easier as time passes because, in the end, I really feel the starting point is that your company's vision must be clearly laid out and the top management must be aligned with it. Once that's out of the way, whether it's a startup, whether it's a traditional multi generational business, or a business which has been in the market for maybe 5 years, 10 years, they all will come to a conclusion that we just have to innovate to make sure that we remain competitive in a market which is changing at a rapid pace.
Why do you say, I'll ask again a devil's advocate question. Why do you think the logistics market, either globally or in the part of India that you compete in, is changing rapidly? Like, what is new or what is causing change to happen more rapidly than it did, let's say, 10 years, 50 years, 1,000 years ago?
So one of there are many reasons, but the primary reason would be the availability of data and the ease in which data is being available right now. Yes, businesses were are still relationships are very important in a business. But see, Nick, what was happening is 5 years or 7 years earlier, an exporter was so busy in their work that they have a reliable logistics service provider. They're just happy with the way things are going. Now, with the power of data, with the power of databases, there are so many logistics providers even approaching new exporters through AI, get to understand what's the actual cost of a certain shipment from point A to point B. So we are reaching a place where that's where logistics, as your question was, in the logistics industry, that's where the innovation requirement is coming in, because customers are also more aware, and the main reason for that has been the easy access to data and more people joining the workforce who are interested to analyze data and use data to add value to their respective organizations. So we have to be on our toes always.
So let's ask a question about the PDP Group. You guys have been around 50 years. 50 years ago, there weren't databases, there weren't computers. You probably did not have data analysts. Does that mean you now, given all this data stuff you said, you guys have databases, you have data analysts or data scientists who are thinking about all this stuff? And if so, how is that conversation that you decide to hire your first data scientist or analyst?
Right. So the first thing for us was that we have, over the last 8 to 9 years, we built a completely integrated cloud software. The moment we did that, see, the first step was, do we have data available so we can have a question on whether we can analyze the data, right? Initially we would just depend, okay, person X is the head of a certain department, any queries go to person X, any queries go to person Y. When does this change? Once data is available across departments, across to the management, so the management can also first review data and then meet, and then what would happen is the meetings would be more productive. We would actually identify the root causes of certain matters. And once we started realizing the benefits of this, that's when in the PDP group as well, we hired people who are, of course, having a basic knowledge of logistics, but their main purpose is to analyze the data which is coming and giving informed reports to the subject matter experts who may not be that great at tech but really know what they're doing. So once they get those data from the data analysts or the executives who are joining and analyzing the data, they are also able to change their mind or identify which are the potential new markets they can explore as well.
Got it. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about what you do. So, my understanding is you have duties that span HR, operations, and a couple other areas, right?
Yes.
At what point did your organization, the PDP Group, decide we need a chief innovation officer? Like, what caused that title or that need to come into place, and then saying, Avishkar, we want you to be the CIO here? Was there an event that happened? Was there an evolution in the business? Because a lot of businesses will have a chief human resources officer or chief
Yes.
marketing officer, but the chief innovation officer is a pretty new role as far as companies go. I think 5% of the global Fortune 500 have it. So what caused you guys to decide you wanted that role?
So actually, there was a progression to this because before I was Chief Innovation Officer, I was having a role which is still much more accepted or much more seen than a Chief Innovation Officer, which is the role of a strategic planner, where I was mainly involved in the policy making and I was involved in devising what will be our next strategies. And once I was making these strategies with my management team, what we realized is to execute or to achieve, because building a strategy and a 5 year plan is all good. How are we going to achieve it? So we could have a senior operations person, we could have a senior accounts person, marketing, but who is going to make sure that we have a culture of thinking out of the box? And that's where this switch happened, where we as a collective decided I need to focus my efforts, get trained, and learn the art of how do I make sure that people are not just staying in their comfort zone. And as a company, we are always focusing on innovating and thinking what are the areas we can explore, the markets we can go to. And while we were talking, the word innovating, we have to innovate, just kept coming. And we started researching and we saw some title which is a chief innovation officer. So if you ask me, that is the origin story of how the chief innovation officer came in. But yes, it did come on a serious note with the mindset of how are we going to achieve our 5 year plans. It's not going to happen just by hiring people and letting them just do what they do. You need something else in the mix.
Got it. And so, do you guys? Let me ask a quick follow-up. Do you guys have like a chief operations officer, someone responsible for running the physical infrastructure?
Yes.
So then, what is given your responsibilities overlap with his or hers a little bit? What is the interaction like between your chief operations manager, chief operations officer, and the chief innovation officer? Who's, I imagine you're telling him or her, you need to get better, you need to innovate, and they're like, I'm busy making sure stuff gets from point A to point B.
True. No, that's actually a very interesting question, because if you have a chief operations officer and a chief innovation officer who's involved in different verticals, including operations, so how does that dynamic work? Well, the operations manager, the senior operations manager, is ensuring that they get a, suppose in logistics, they get a cargo handling plan or a program at the starting of the day, and they have to make sure their teams are working well to make sure that these dispatches are being met, the handling and the loading works are happening. They are also involved in, suppose, going to seminars, attending and understanding better ways to operate. Now the role of a chief innovation officer here comes is where we are in direct communication with the second line of command to understand what are the operational issues which they face. Suppose they are finding out that there are some areas where there is a lack of information flow, so they are having to wait for a certain number of hours before they get the information and they start working. Now the role of a chief innovation officer here is to make sure that those gaps are being plugged in, which not only are limited to the operations but are going beyond operations, which are including tech tech, which are including human resource, and which are including even the client feedback which comes into the picture. Because again, operations is operations officer is someone who's focused on their department in particular, whereas the innovation is bringing a mix to make sure that we are moving to a path where we intend to move to.
Got it. Okay, I want to ask now my last question, but it's often the toughest. Okay, so if I look at a chief operations officer, they may be measured on what the operating expenses. The chief marketing officer may be measured on how much marketing they, how many impressions or clicks or leads they get. Chief financial officer might be on working capital or profitability. So each of those jobs has something they are measured against. How do you measure innovation? How does your boss or your team assess whether you or your team was successful at the end of the year or at the end of the quarter? What is innovation measured as or defined as in a way that an outside observer, whether that be a shareholder or the CEO or the board, understands what happened last year in the world of Avishkar and as Chief Innovation Officer?
Okay, so to
And it's a
answer
hard
to answer.
question. I know.
Yeah, I mean, yes, if you look at the quantifiable elements, it's a bit tough, but still, what I would say is, how do you measure the productivity of an innovation officer? It's first of all, what are the kind of issues which are being brought towards the management? I'll start from here, Nick, because when you hear a marketing, as you said, a marketing officer's KRA is completely dependent on how is the sales going, how many new markets we are entering to. Now, who is the person in your organization who is bringing issues which you have not heard about, or which has so far been told that this is not really a major issue? But if someone brings to your mind a certain issue which may feel small but gives an analysis of how this small issue is having a knock on effect, which is potentially creating harm to your organization or potentially affecting the positive growth of your organization, if I put it that way, the role of the result of a chief innovation officer is what kind of unique issues are being brought to the forefront which have probably not been brought before, or what kind of solutions are being proposed which have been out of the box. For me, it's as simple as that. You have a chief innovation officer who brings 2 to 3 issues to your table in one quarter, but those 2 to 3 issues create an atmosphere where you actually understand what is the core issue of a particular department or a particular reason the company is not doing well. I think that's a metric in which you can measure, understand what kind of problems they bring to the table, understand what kind of proposed solutions are coming to problems which may seem very simple to answer.
Perfect. That was my last question for you, Avishkar. Is there anything else you want to add as we wrap up this interview?
I would like to ask you, like, what made you go into this niche of having fireside chats with chief innovation officers? You did mention that, there's a small percentage, 4% of companies, Fortune 500, who are hiring chief innovation officers, but I still do feel you are quite passionate about this whole process of talking to innovation officers, understanding what drives them. So if you could just share your insights on this.
Sure. I have three reasons. Number one, it's always just fun for me to talk to smart people, right? In logistics, I have a little bit of experience, but I've chatted with somebody who runs a healthcare immunology firm. I have no idea about that. And it's just fun for me to learn. I'm a bit of a nerd. That's reason number one. Reason number two is it's interesting to understand because I sell to innovation officers. That's what I do, or my company does. I don't actually get involved in the sales process, but it's helpful to understand how people define innovation because it's very different for some of our government clients versus a bank in Japan versus a logistics firm in India. Each organization defines innovation very differently. And then thirdly, also from kind of a selfish organizational perspective, it's helpful to understand the problems that that innovation departments or innovation officers are feeling, because then I can learn and implement that into our software as we think about our roadmaps.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I do agree that there are so many different takes on innovation. It's not something which can be just clearly defined, and everyone has their perspective to it. So yes, it was interesting to hear your perspective as
Right.
well.
Like as a silly example, I work in technology or software, and almost all technology companies their definition of innovation is how many new features did we launch, and that's a pretty narrow definition of what innovation is when you compare to somebody, let's say like you. Your description was it involves how communication is happening, how quickly you can react to information. When I chat with some of my government or with folks in the public sector, many of them are not talking about new products or services, but it is how effectively they are engaging with their constituents. And that's a very different definition of innovation, not better or worse, just different.
True,
And it's
true.
wonderful learning from all of these very intelligent people, how they're thinking about innovating within their organizations or within the context in which they operate.
Right.
Perfect. Anything else, Avishkar, as we wrap up this episode?
No, it was a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for having me here.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Avishkar.